Esteemed delegates, esteemed panelists, esteemed future leaders, and friends of Switzerland, good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline Friedenthal. I'm the Science and Technology Counselor at the Embassy of Switzerland, and I'm also your Program Director for the evening. We are delighted to have you with us on this auspicious day today, where we join virtually and in person the 50th St. Gallen Symposium. The St. Gallen Symposium is a global platform for dialogue on issues that we often ponder on, that brings us to the issues concerning societal challenges, especially as the pandemic has thrown us into a tumble of uncertainty. The foundation of the St. Gallen Symposium is that of cross-generational dialogue that originated from a body of students at the St. Gallen University. This year, the St. Gallen Symposium focus on trust matters as a genuine concern of the 21st century. Please allow me now to introduce to you Veronique Haller, our Charge d'Affaires of the Embassy of Switzerland of South Africa, to give us the welcoming address. Ms. Veronique Haller is a graduate of the Anglia Law School in the United Kingdom and the Zurich University Law School. Veronique is fluent in French, German, English, and Spanish. Ms. Haller has a fondness for human rights. She held several positions in this field across the globe. Ms. Veronique occupied many critical roles in the Swiss Confederation dealing with international law and human rights. Her contribution was recognized by the Swiss Confederation when she served as the counselor to the president in 2018. We know the interplay between trust and human rights, which makes Ms. Veronique Haller an excellent persona on the topic of trust matters.
Distinguished panelists, esteemed guests, dear friends of Switzerland, dear friends of technology. I'm happy to be here and to bring to you the first blended St. Gallen Symposium in 50 years. The St. Gallen Symposium was actually born even before the World Economic Forum in Davos. It was born in 1969 as a response to the international student unrest in 1968. And it has grown to become one of the leading world's initiative for intergenerational debate. Before we go deeper into the St. Gallen Symposium through a panel discussion, allow me to share with you a few personal notes on the issue of today. I was there at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2015 when Klaus Schwab, the president of the WEF, used for the first time the term of the fourth industrial revolution. Little did we know then, and we were all glad that someone put forward a term to describe what was happening. Artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, blockchain, robotics, big data, 3D printing, genetic editing, self-driving cars, and apparently many more births to follow under a family name, digitalization. We all felt that this time it was fundamentally different from the first, the second, and the third industrial revolution, even challenging ideas about what it means to be human. In 2018, I was the counselor to the president of Switzerland, and mostly, when meeting other presidents, they would talk freely about economic and geopolitical matters, but were literally sticking to their speaking points when it came to digitalization issues. There were a few exceptions. I remember the meeting with Pope Francis in Geneva. He talked about leapfrogging and how the fourth industrial revolution can be a chance for the African continent and its young population. When I landed in South Africa, beginning of 2019, one of the first call of duty was the advancement of blockchain collaboration between Switzerland, South Africa, and Mauritius. So at the Embassy of Switzerland, we are excited about our cooperation with South Africa to realize the fourth industrial revolution. We need the North-South connection as fair and equal partners. On the eve of the South African lockdown, we were in discussions with the Department of Science and Innovation to establish a blockchain chair, unaware that this was also the eve of the digitalization burst, with the pandemic being the catalyst. Nothing could have prepared us for what we were to experience, the conversion of the digital world with the pandemic. The plethora of online platforms was enough to weaken the strongest, exacerbated by an omnipresence of digital meetings, webinars, and conferences. But somehow, we found our way through the new world. As it is the case for every change, societal parameters of trust are relevant, and in this case, digital trust. The question then, can we place our trust in society through technology? We can only answer this question if we ponder on several critical issues. For example, how technology companies influence our choices and behavior? What is the institutional foundation for digital trust? Do technology and data belong to society, or does society belong to technology and data? How do we extend the trust in sciences and academia to reach the trust in tech companies? How do we ensure that trust is the heartbeat of innovation and new technology? To tackle these fundamental questions, different stakeholders in Switzerland, from academia, business, government, and civil society, established a center of expertise for digital trust and cybersecurity. This center is situated at the shores of the Lake of Geneva and is meant to grow, to become the so-called Trust Valley. Ladies and gentlemen, let's listen to what our panelists will say about how trust in technology matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. I really like that. I think for me what's standing out is the question is, do data belong to us, or do we belong to data? Or do we belong to technology? Does technology belong to us? I think that is something that we can ponder on. So moving on into the program, we're going to the heartbeat of the program, and that is our panel discussion. And for our panel discussion, the topic is developing and enabling trust in society through technology. This topic, this heading can be quite ambiguous, so you need to think about it. You can look at it from two sides, but Daniel, our moderator, will unpack that. I would like to introduce you to Dr. Daniel Visser as our moderator this evening, especially as he has been himself an alumni of the St. Gallen Symposium, which make him an excellent candidate for being the moderator this evening. Daniel holds a PhD, believe it or not, in biochemistry from Rhodes University, and has been active in research and innovation, as you can see, for 19 years. So he was also instrumental in establishing the South African Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution that is linked to the World Economic Forum. It's a hub at the CSIR that has been instrumental in establishing. Daniel, yeah. Allow me to say something personal. In this is how long, 14, the Federal Councillor Schneider Amman was coming to visit South Africa, and we all visited the CSIR. And I remember back in those days, Daniel was the one running around showing the Federal Councillor around, and he was with a big delegation. And so I'm very happy that we can do something in the fourth industrial, those days it was biotechnology, which was the frontier science, and now we're in the fourth industrial revolution as the frontier science, and we're still with you, Daniel, and we're very grateful for that. So the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jackie, for that introduction. Good afternoon to everybody here in the audience. and particularly to everybody that has tuned in on the global stream. A special thank you to the Charge d'Affaires, Ms. Haller, and the Swiss Embassy for organising this event on the occasion of the 50th St. Gallen Symposium. As mentioned, I'm an alumni of the St. Gallen Symposium, and I believe that the discussions that we have here are critical in society today. And particularly this discussion, a discussion around trust. Increasingly at the moment, it's difficult in society to understand who do we trust or what do we trust. And in an era of social media where we have unvetted facts and we have misinformation being passed along as truth, it's very difficult to understand, do we trust the information that we are being fed? And particularly in this last year where we've had this pandemic, we've had to trust governments, we've had to trust technologies, we've had to trust institutions, and we've had to trust each other for our own health and our well-being. So trust in society is a key discussion to have. And particularly as Veronique mentioned, as we move into new technologies, is it the trust in the technology that we worry about, or can we use these technologies to further enable trust in society? With me today, I've got a diverse set of panelists to delve into this question whether technology can play a role in enabling trust in society. I'll give each of them just a couple of minutes to introduce themselves, but at the same time, I would like them to frame the problem a little from within their domains. What are either perceived or real issues with trust from your area? Starting with Dr. Tabi Lehoka. Tabi is an economist, runs her own investment firm. She's held various positions on presidential commissions as well as company boards. So, Tabi, if you want to add on to that.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. You know, as an economist, and nothing has made us adopt digitalization and also this fourth industrial revolution as much as the pandemic has. I think there was a lot of hesitancy before. We talk about the fourth revolution, industrial revolution, without understanding it. And the hesitancy was because of trust. Governments were not trusting of technology. Communities and societies are not trusting of technology, and also policymakers who are bringing about this policy that we need to adopt. And then we were hit by the pandemic last year, and suddenly we had to digitalize. And we realized too that we were not prepared. So everyone had to go onto the internet. Meetings were held virtually, and the economy had to move along, and businesses had to continue, schooling had to continue using technology. And it was almost as if we were just pushed into this. And then we had to develop this trust. And it wasn't easy because it was it was that kind of relationship where led by government, led by corporates, and sometimes when it faltered, we were disappointed, and sometimes we then decided that this is not something we should trust. And especially when that technology requires information, our personal information. So, as an economist, I think that it has been a good thing, what has happened in the past couple of months, being propelled into this. But at the same time, as we'll speak later on, there are dangers with just, this adoption, this quick adoption of technology. And I think that if it wasn't for technology, we would be performing even worse than we are as an economy, as a society. I think that technology allowed us to just adapt and run with it. And we've never seen anything like this in our history in terms of just adopting something that we've never experimented with in this capacity and just going with it. So it's an interesting time, and I think that if we were hesitant about adopting the fourth revolution or embracing the fourth revolution, we were forced into it.
Yeah, the pandemic has created a mass pilot, and we're still learning as we go along. Then across to Ms. Karena Crerar, Managing Director at Edelman, South Africa. Karena?
Thanks, Daniel. Hi, everyone. So as Edelman, and I mean, Edelman is a global communications firm working with organizations and brands on managing reputation. And we study trust. We've been studying trust for 21 years. I'm probably the least of a technology expert on this panel. But what I am comfortable and familiar with is the concept of trust. And it actually has more dimensions than we realize if we break it down. It's a very clear metric that we can use to measure trust across the main institutions in society. I think what's interesting about the discussion, the topic that we're having this evening, is this idea that when we think about trust and when we study trust, we come at it from a very human-centric aspect. It's really only sentient beings that can trust. So it's very important that we think about how that then plays into the idea of technology. We've seen in our trust barometer data that we do, we have an annual trust barometer that looks at the levels of trust across all 4 institutions in society. And when we deep dive into technology as a sector specifically, we're seeing an unfortunate decline over the last few years, and actually, interestingly enough, much more significant year on year from last year to this year. And you would have expected, given the pandemic and our reliance, our over-reliance across the board on technology, that the levels of trust would have increased. But it's what's happening behind the scenes and the way people are engaging with that technology that's really causing that stress point, where ethics becomes a bit of an issue. Great, we love tech, it works for us, it does what we need it to do, but is it doing the right things in the right way? And I think this is what people are really grappling with, and this is where the tension point comes in. We've seen these levels of trust dip from 2018. I think we saw this idea of a backlash to sort of cyber attacks. In 2020, we saw people worried about automation and what that meant for job losses in the future. These things coming into play are really creating a little bit of a worrying dynamic for the technology sector, and there's a real onus and responsibility on building that trust back in the years to come.
Excellent. Thanks, Karena. You bring up a couple of interesting issues which I might delve into at some stage. There is something called machine-to-machine communication, and the trust in that is there's a whole ethical debate about that as well. What information can one machine feed another, and where's the information coming from? But yeah, we'll touch on that. Prashant Paima, coming across to you. I'm going to call you a digital banker for now, but you can explain a little bit further. Prashant is the founder of a company called Always in Touch Real Time, but I'll let you expand.
Yeah, thanks. The topic of digital trust sits very well with me, and my passion to look for different creative ways to embed and enhance digital trust to facilitate financial instructions and or confidential information. As you say, I had years of experience in banking, which gave me exposure to incidents that breached digital trust, where funds were withdrawn without the permission or consent of the account owner. And these incidents is what drove me to form AIR. So that when every individual or businesses are forced to create a digital identity to facilitate electronic payments, they can do so with confident trust. Like you say, digital trust in these days is continuously being challenged and tested, because the way the current solutions or most of the solutions that are built with engaging with a reactive manner. They engage the users in a reactive manner. For example, if you look at our current authentication practices, you have to, it prompts the user to provide the identification and authorization password upfront, and thereafter confirm via a two-factor secure code. That's a reactive model. All parties need to be identified upfront. And once you have that consensus with all parties, then you can provide the instruction and then finalize it with an authorization. And that's why we at AIR, we promote the proactive technologies to combat crime and corruption. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much, Prashant. You touch on an important point there, which we definitely will touch on just now, which is setting up the rules ahead of time, being proactive rather than reactive. Very important in establishing trust, both in technology and in society. Finally, on to Ms. Arlene Mulder, also St. Gallen alumni. She is the founder of WeThinkCode and is currently the head of insurance at Virtus Medtech. Arlene.
Thank you so much. Good evening. It's great to be back. 5 years ago, I was privileged to be invited as a leader of tomorrow. So great to be back here today. My career also started in banking. And as you say, banking is all about trust. And during that time, I also saw the advancement of technology. During my time in banking, I also worked in mergers and acquisitions, so we advised large corporates. And we saw this whole theme emerging of everything going towards the digital world. That is how we started WeThinkCode. So WeThinkCode is a software engineering university. So here, we were the ones training the developers. So we were on the side where we developed the technology. And some of the interesting debates we always had was that it's important for our young coders to understand the power and to understand that there's ethics behind everything that you code. And sometimes you have good intentions, but think a bit further. What are the implications of these rules that you set in? So it was very important there for us to understand our power and our responsibility on the side of developing the technology. Currently, my day job is in a medical tech company. So we've started a financial services, insurance, and investment company for healthcare professionals. In this group, what's very interesting to see is we have a lot of data, and most healthcare professionals, they do their training, education, and now also their financial services. So you can imagine what trust is around that. As a tech company, again, one of the themes we're seeing here is a lot of cybersecurity. I think on a daily basis, we have attempts to hack our database. So there's very much the cybersecurity side that's important. And then I think we'll get into it, but especially on the medical side, there's been a very big focus on, what is the intent? And for us now also looking at how we protect our medical professionals.
Thanks very much, Arlene. Again, I think it's almost building on what Prashant was saying there. In developers need to have trust in the back of their head as they're developing. It's not something that can be built into it later on. And we'll see if we can touch on that a little bit later as well. Just a quick logistical issue for everybody here in the audience. If you would like to ask a question, unfortunately due to COVID, we cannot pass a microphone around. So you can either scan the code that's above me here to digitally ask us a question and it'll come up afterwards. Otherwise, you can go onto the YouTube channel where this is being streamed, and obviously everybody globally on the YouTube channel, you can ask a question through the channel and it'll come through to us at the end. Okay, so as Jackie mentioned, I want to explore this topic from two angles. Ms. Haller mentioned the trust in technology, and I think it is very important to start exploring the trust in technology before we start exploring the other side of it, which is how can technology enable trust in society? What is coming forward now that helps us to build more trust in the technologies themselves, but in society as a whole? So, Toby, I want to start off with you. You started mentioning some of the new digital models that have come up, and particularly the new economic digital platforms, and the biggest one obviously is cryptocurrencies. So, can we trust these systems as an alternative economic generator to our conventional digital or our conventional currencies and exchanges?
So that's a difficult one to answer because it depends where you are and it depends on your jurisdiction. If you look at how cryptocurrency is done in the US and how people like Elon Musk has been punting it, many people have been buying it this year, and it's very volatile. Whereas in South Africa, the Reserve Bank has been very cautious about what it would mean to the financial system. Do we recognize it as a currency, but it's not tradable? How do you monitor it? How do you, currencies impact on inflation? How does it react to the financial system, and how does it impact on the financial system? So, I think in South Africa, we're still we are, learning about it, learning about what it means within our context. But again, trust is at the center of it. The unknowns make it very untrustworthy. And so those who've seen the volatility of it, because I don't, as an economist, understand the fundamentals of cryptocurrency. I don't know what moves Bitcoin, whereas I understand exactly what moves the Rand. So why would I buy Bitcoin if I don't understand what the fundamentals are? And also currencies are, so just, the Rand is a volatile currency because we're a small and open economy, and there's capital inflows and outflows, and people trade it daily. Bitcoin doesn't have the same characteristics. So I think that trust and the unknown are the issues with cryptocurrency.
I've got a follow-up for you. In terms of the South African approach, now I have worked with the group within Treasury that are looking at cryptocurrency and our approach to cryptocurrency. Are we as a country being cautious in a clever way, or are we being overcautious when it comes to regulating cryptocurrencies?
So I think that we typically overregulate, because that would sit in the Reserve Bank, and that would be a regulator, the Deputy Governor Kuben's role. And I know that the regulator in South Africa tends to be a lot more conservative versus in other markets. So I think that they're cautious, but should this, should cryptocurrency be the new trading currency? I think that we will have to adopt. It's one of those, we adopt or we're laggards.
We fall behind.
Yeah.
I can't remember when last I carried cash on me, so digital currency and maybe one day absolutely cryptocurrencies may be the way forward. There's a second part to it, and we do have a couple of minutes. You touch on something that's very important, which is around mistrust in technology, and this is almost to the whole panel, mistrust in technology because we don't understand it. Particularly some of the newer technologies coming along. Ms. Haller pointed out a couple of them, and I've engaged a lot of audiences where just words like blockchain and artificial intelligence and distributed ledgers, just the words scare people, and they shut down to any explanation of it. What is your feeling of how do we create that trust, or how do we get people to understand technologies, or do we even do that? I don't know, anybody can answer.
I think, I'll start. It'll take some time, because, I remember getting into the first car which had a parking assistant, and you basically sit and it reverses and it beeps until it gets, itself in a good parking spot. And I was very tempted to put my foot on the brakes, and that's because I've been conditioned that way. And so it will take some time for us to trust in machines, to trust in artificial intelligence, to trust computers. And trust really is at the center of our conversation, but we trust ourselves more than we trust objects. We can determine outcomes in the way we respond to objects and in the way we give objects information. And so suddenly you have something that has been given by someone else, that information, and you're supposed to interact with it in a trusting way. You don't know how it's going to respond to you. And so that in itself, we have difficulty trusting one another as humans. Now imagine having to trust machines that are, that have information that you don't know about. So it's almost as, it's alien to us. It's almost like having extraterrestrials coming to South Africa or coming to the world, and suddenly you're supposed to interact with them and have this trusting relationship.
Yeah, Prashant.
Yeah. So when you're saying trust technology, it's more about practice. right? And if people continuously use blockchain or any technologies that underbeds blockchain, and with practice, they gain confidence. And with confidence, you gain trust, right? So having that as well, and using technology in the right way, like I say, it's proactive. That triggers the human sixth sense, because we always go back to our gut feel to have our trust monitor. And if you don't feel if some situation is kosher, per se, and then you wouldn't go forward. You won't go and you won't trust. You just close off. So it's about using technology to tap into this human sixth sense, to guide principles, because we don't have enough data available in front of us when we're using the technology. So naturally, we need to go back to our sixth sense.
It's actually a good point. I mean, using the technology helps us to trust it more. I mean, if I had to tell you that I want you to get into a 2-ton piece of metal that as it's moving around is continuously exploding, you probably would look at me funny, but that's your car, okay? So, back then it must have been kind of scary. So, yeah, Arlene, I want to come to you then. You and I were at St. Gallen, and the topic there was the generational gap. What are the issues between generations? And when it comes to trust in technology, we have a similar thing. Well, it's possibly a perception, and I think it changes, and it's not a generalization, but a mistrust in an older generation that didn't grow up with a lot of these new technologies, as opposed to a younger generation who's grown up with them, has used it all the time. What are your views on the adoption of technology in the older generation because of the older generation not trusting technology?
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a bit. I think it's not necessarily older generations don't trust and younger do. I think we mistrust for different reasons. I'll give an example. When we started WeThinkCode, so now we say we're this new technology university, and it's completely free education. So the parents would say to us, we don't trust this because you're not accredited with a university, and my kids are not going to get a job if they're a software engineer. They must be an accountant. That's why they didn't trust us. The younger students said to us, this must be a scam, because what is free education? We don't trust it. If I then look at technology, it's quite interesting. So if you take the sort of millennials, which I'm part of the generation, and then Gen Z, the younger generation, and then the baby boomers, the older generation. So as millennials, we literally grew up, as you say, with technology. So I still remember a time when I had an encyclopedia, but also this dial-up modem. So as millennials, if you look at the research as well, we are the early adopters of technology because we're quite excited about it. And we remember a time before and after, but we understand a lot more about the technology. So I'm very comfortable with blockchain AI, but we understand, and because we grew up with it, we want to know the reasons behind. So if I ask millennials, do you trust or not technology? They say, well, I want to know the data policy. Actually, my friends read the data policies. They say, is there a cookie policy? What's your puppy policy? What are you going to do with my data? Do you give me the option to opt in or opt out? So those are the reasons why millennials would distrust. Older generations, I would say, they think it's going to be too difficult. So I say to my dad, get the FNB app on your phone with biometric authentication. He's like, oh, I don't know how to do it. But the first time you do it, oh, it's easy. So I think there are different reasons for us to distrust technology. And I think it's important for us as society or businesses to understand that and perhaps approach generations differently and build trust differently.
Thanks. It's actually an excellent lead into Karena, because I wanted to chat with you about communication. And particularly, as you said, Edelman is a communication company, and you deal with a lot of companies globally on how to protect their brands, but also to how to communicate and to build trust in their brands. And I alluded to social media earlier. We are bombarded with information at the moment. And how can we trust even the terms and conditions? How can we trust the information that is around us every day? And I struggle with what is information, what's misinformation, what's fact, what's not. The companies that you work with, how are they dealing with it, and how should we as individuals potentially deal with all of that information?
Yeah, I mean, and I think the reality is there is just so much of it, and what we identified as part of our trust barometer for 2021, which was basically a survey of last year, which you can imagine what was happening in our lives last year, was really this idea of the pandemic and the infodemic, as we're calling it, which is just so much information everywhere. You don't actually know where to turn to, and you can imagine when you already living in a crisis, your fears, your sort of basic needs are anxiety are heightened. That's when you become most fearful, and you start to look for who can you best trust in those moments. So what we saw, and you mentioned earlier, in terms of trust in government, for example, governments had a hard job last year, and some of them got it right and some of them got it wrong, and we saw that in the sort of varied levels of trust across the world. But what happened is that largely, unfortunately, we saw a bit of a trust bubble with governments in terms of lockdown procedures, etc., what happened last year. And because of that, then the rise of business, because people are looking to say, well, I don't know that I can trust my government, so therefore I'm going to trust the next biggest institution, which is the private sector. So where we consult and counsel our clients on is really, well, what would your role then be? What is your mandate as a business when you think about information sharing? How do you make sure that what you are sharing is trustworthy, credible content, so that you don't become part of that mix? What we saw as well last year through the research was that people were obviously going online a lot and educating themselves on things that, I don't think in my life I've ever Googled what's in a vaccine. It just wouldn't have crossed my mind. So, but unfortunately, what's also happening is that none of the information sources that we have access to are trusted. Social media, search engines, traditional media, and of course, the trust scores in media as an institution are also low. So it's really, unfortunately, this misinformation and disinformation, which are actually two different things, it's pervasive. And the worry is that if it continues like this, all it does is play more into societal fears and just creates this ongoing shroud of distrust around everything.
Yeah, it is a big concern. I've seen situations where people go down a rabbit hole because they start trusting information that fits a narrative instead of information that's true. And it really is, I think it's one of the biggest problems that we do need to solve is how to vet information and understand that. I'm going to shift slightly. Prashant, I'm coming to you. Your main area is trust in digital engagement platforms, let me put it that way. So not just banking, but how you engage with an industry. And yes, it's been in the banking area. All of us, just about all of us, engage with digital platforms, even if it's just your email in some way. And we're all a bit worried about cyber attacks, about hacks, about how we protect our personal information. So, I was wanting you to talk a little bit about how can we trust in the digital platforms and can we trust in the digital platforms out there?
Yeah, there are a few factors that you have to consider. You have to look at the policies that the institution or internet portal provides you in the guidelines. And if it's too complicated, it becomes, then your fear starts. It's because now you don't understand all the security guidelines that they've provided you. And that's one way to break it. So what I say is organizations must be held liable completely in building their trust. So when they own that portal, they must implement all the security principles and methods to make sure that when the user engages with them, they just have to click one button and everything happens. We shouldn't rely on individuals to look at all these security guidelines and then now I have to have antivirus, I have to have this, I have to have that, I have to check. I have to have a complex password. It must be, alphabets with symbols. That's too complex, and that's automatically you just want to say, okay, I don't think this site is interesting for me. I don't want to go further, So in order to, like I say, in order for users to feel that comfort, the organizations must be completely held liable. And there are ways we can use, and luckily, like we say, we're in a world where there are advances in technology and disruptors. We have APIs, we have blockchain, we have sophisticated encryption models, and when we embed all of that in a proactive manner and functionality, we can create digital trust. And with biometrics as well is one of them. Some people are concerned with the myths of using biometrics because they'll be tracked, but they're mistaking voice biometrics to voice assistants. The voice assistants are, like your standard search engines, but it's voice-based. And search engines are known for gathering data about you and your behavioral patterns, so then next time you go on a Google page, an ad comes up and say, hey, you were looking for a kettle, or you had a discussion and somehow Siri just heard that and you had an advert pop up as soon as you go on Safari. So those are different to voice biometrics used for authentication, because that's in the private domain, and voice assistants used to help you and guide you to search whatever across the internet is in the public domain. And I think it's maybe organizations being transparent, guiding users, what the technology behind building the trust will give more trust to the public.
Absolutely. So, Prashant, I'm actually going to come back to you straight away. You started talking about a few technologies there, and if we now say, how can technology enable that trust? So we're going to flip it now. You offline, we've spoken about digital identities. And a lot of the things that you spoke about now is, it's applicable to everybody that has a smartphone, everybody that has a computer, everybody that has access to the technology. But that's not all of society. There's a lot of people that interact or have to interact with digital platforms that aren't their own and have to trust them. And we've spoken about digital identities. How can a platform like a digital identity assist in protecting personal information, and particularly not just for those that have access to technology and are tech savvy?
Yeah. Digital identities, what I feel it should be universal, right? It must be governed by an authoritative body, right? And must be independent of public and private companies. But it must be mandated by regulation and be driven by regulation, right? So once you know that these principles, these guiding principles are within the authoritative body, people can entrust using the digital identity service. And what organizations must still be held responsible for integrating with their digital identity and being the final, having the final say on to say, should I allow this client onto my platform? Do I have enough data around me to confirm the validity of the interaction? And once you have that, then yes, you can use digital identities. In digital identities, where we're looking at in the US, a foundation called ID 2020 is looking towards this fourth industrial revolution and saying, how can we collect all the data elements about a user to get a digital identity can be used across any platform, whether it be confidential or non-confidential. And in each scenario, if it's non-confidential, you use basic policies to give you access to the portal. But if it's confidential, then you go with vigorous and robust policies and policy checks, and to give access to the portal. But at the end, technology is all there for us to use. But as a developer, we need to understand the controls that we need to apply. So standard auditing controls like segregation control. We need to separate the identification control from the authorization control. Apple, for Apple Pay, they merged the two, and it gripes me. But I understand why they do it, right? Because they're in a closed loop, right? Everything they do is they own it. They own the platform, they own the device, and they own the operating system that runs the device. And within that, because it's closed loop, I can understand and I can forgive them to use both principles in one. But when you're outside that, you're in an open loop like Android or Windows, then you have to go by your guiding principles and your auditing controls. And once you develop the solution using that auditing principles, then trust can be built within the technology.
Absolutely. The one thing we've got to get right about, and I think we have to some extent, but with digital identities, I mean, you know, if I'm signing on to my medical aid, for instance, I want them to know X and Y and Z about me. It's not the same things that I want my banking institution to know about me. Yeah. Okay, but all of this information is held by a third party, which is likely, I'm not sure at the moment, to be Home Affairs, who doesn't have the capability at the moment. So, you know, as much as I can see the value of digital identities, and I believe we have to move forward with digital identities, I'm a little bit concerned about how we implement it within, whether it's a South African, an African, or a third world setting.
So yeah, could I add to that? So that concern is rightful in to say that digital identity must only form the identification control, nothing else. Right? And that's why I say information like your medical information, when you're on that portal, the digital identity is just a service that provides data to this portal. And the health service portal must be the final owner of your data. And that's how we've built the solution, to say the ownership of the customer data must always lie with the organization. We must just be the mere facilitator of embedding the trust, of creating that trust contract, a digital trust contract between the parties.
Arlene, I'm going to come to you now. It leads into this because you're working in the insurance space at the moment, and particularly for medical professionals. So, you know, first of all, I want you to discuss really what kind of tools are there available, technologies that can help to protect professionals, and at the same time it would be protecting individuals, but particularly in their professional life from litigation, from fraud. All of those kind of things are things that as professionals we get attacks every day basically on these things. But then I'm going to open it up to the panel because it brings up another interesting area around who owns your data. So for the rest of the panel, have a bit of a think about it. But Arlene, if you could respond.
So currently for us, so that there are two things to consider. So on the one hand, as the organization, and there I agree, it is very much our responsibility to keep the data safe and secure that we collect. So I'll start there. So what we do is we also partner with trusted bodies. So for example, we make sure that we are Microsoft Gold partner. So that is another trusted body that, that we look at their policies and procedures. This is something that they do on a daily basis and we learn from them. We make sure that we are ISO 27001, so that's an international standard on data information security. So there are certain guidelines and best practices around the world that we can follow. So that is how we keep our internal database safe. What's very interesting now is working with healthcare professionals, and this is what we see, our slogan is even defending the practice, because we see ourselves really helping and guiding and defending our healthcare professionals. They need to focus on saving lives and do what they're good at. So there's a lot of things that we can help them with. So for example, they have all their patients' data. Is it secure? Is it on a file? Is it saved on just on your basic drive? They don't even understand, like if you say, is it saved in the cloud inside, they'll say like, what are you talking about? So the first step for us actually is to educate. And look, I know you always, like people always say, but there's blockchain or AI and machine learning. You don't have to understand all the metrics behind it. Just understand the implications. Just know you can be hacked, and someone needs to keep you safe. And then go to the experts. I'm not going to try and do heart surgery. That's not my expertise. So to professionals out there, I would say find trusted bodies and partners that you can rely on, but upskill yourself enough that you at least know what questions to ask.
Yeah, talking about the plethora of information, there's a lot of information at very simple levels around these technologies. And people are free to go and search it. And I would encourage that people do create more of their own understanding about these technologies. I'm a bit worried about, expecting people to trust in the professionals. We've had a significant problem with people trusting in science during a pandemic, where it is the one thing we must trust in. So, it's a different story completely. But to the other panel members, Prashant, you mentioned around the information that goes to the medical aid. Whose information is that? Who has rights to that information? There's some of it is explained in our Protection of Personal Information Act, but at the end of the day, does a medical aid, for instance, have the right to make money off information that I've supplied to them? And I don't know if the others want to answer as well.
Yeah, from my perspective, they shouldn't be. We've given them the data so that they could have enough medical information to provide us the insurance. But to take our data and sell it on to other third-party organizations out there to sell and market other products to us, I don't believe that they have the right to do so. We own the data as customers, so whatever information we provide the organization, that data is in our ownership, but we are allowing the organization as custodians of our asset, and that's our information being the asset. And that's why they have no right to resell it.
Yeah. One of the things that a lot of companies do is create value off collected data or collective data, okay? And it's creating value internally, which is fine, but that value is created for the company off data that has been supplied to them. All right, and it's an interesting perspective in that, you've supplied that data freely, and you trust that that company will create value for you, but they create a lot more value than that. And there is an argument at the moment that some of that value should be coming back to the person that supplied the data. So it's an interesting topic at the moment. It's an interesting topic around, again, trust in companies that you supply data to will be responsible with your data in your best interest. And I'm not sure that always happens. It always comes down to the human element, I suppose. Karena, at an industry level then, you work with communication, as we've said. What are some of the sort of approaches that industries can take to protect themselves? What kind of tools can they take to develop trust in their customers, in society in general? And when I say industries, I go over to institutions as well. We've sort of skirted around trust in government, and it's been an issue, not just during this pandemic. So, how can we use the different communication tools and platforms that we have to develop that trust in society from these various institutions?
Well, I think it comes back to this idea of sort of earning trust and not necessarily giving it away. And I think the way that we do that, and Arlene spoke about it earlier, around this idea of trusting trusting or trusted partners that you work with, or trusted companies, that trust is built up over time, and we deal in reputation management, and reputations can be built over time, they can be lost in a lot shorter time, but that's really where the currency is for us in terms of that stakeholder management. We think trust is the most important currency any institution can have with its stakeholders. But if we really break down this idea of trust, there's two key dimensions to it really, which is this idea of competence and ethics. And that ethical piece is 3 times more important than the competence. The competence is just that you do what you're meant to do and you can do it okay. The ethics piece of that is there integrity behind this? Is it dependable? You know, does it keep its promises? Does it do what it says it's going to do? And then the last piece of that is purpose. And this is a trend that we've seen over the last few years, which is so significant around where is the positive contribution to society and this responsibility to just do the right thing. And that's really how we look at trust, and that's why trust can be a very subjective thing, but that's what makes it concrete for the way that we think about it. It's like we would say we wouldn't trust our most valued possessions, speaking about data and who we hand that to. We wouldn't trust our child with somebody that we don't know, that we haven't tested before, you know, that we haven't sort of checked that we'll get that child back at the end of the day when we go and fetch it. So that's built up over time, and I think that's the key thing. We know from our trust research that businesses have a mandate to lead, that they've been given that by society. Society is looking to them. Employees as well. There's a big trend around this idea of my employer and the role that my employer has, and particularly in technology companies, where they're looking to their employer to be that sort of truth beacon. And so there's lots of things that can be done. It's about having this mandate to lead. It's about leading with facts, but also acting with empathy. You know, we're in a time where that's just so critical in what we look for in companies, technology companies as well, even more so perhaps. Making sure there's trustworthy information and trustworthy content that we spoke about, but also this idea of partnerships. So what can companies do to partner with academia and government around vaccines and you know, upskilling for jobs for the future and things like that? All of these things will start to really earn that trust and create this sense of you know, these are organizations, these are platforms, these are industries and bodies that have our best interests at heart, and that's when we feel most comfortable to be able to engage in a fair and equitable way.
Absolutely. You talk about vaccines and trust. I'm not sure how vaccines became vehicles of 5G. That was, yeah, an interesting one. Disinformation. Yes, disinformation. So I want to bring it up even one more level now, Tubby, with you. You've sat on a number of presidential commissions where you develop a lot of policy. Maybe chat to the role of policy. And particularly, you know, I know from a government point of view, we have been looking at widespread implementation of technologies, and particularly the enablers around technology, like broadband, etc. But the role of policy in this widespread implementation of technology, how important is that?
It's crucially important. You know, policy is a set of ideas that should be implemented so that you see an outcome, and that outcome typically should be positive. If it's not, it can be tweaked so that the policy then should be malleable and adaptive. But we're not often very good at implementing some of the policies that we have. And, you know, with technology, so here's a little story. So in 2013, we had policy that would link education, health, and government. It was called SA Connect. And so you'd have e-health, and the target for this SA Connect policy was that by 2020, 80% of South Africa would have broadband. There's an irony on that with that date, because 2020 we found ourselves in the midst of a pandemic without enough broadband, so that you know, the educators from basic education to tertiary it struggled with with education because they didn't have enough broadband. You couldn't have e-health, and we also saw a lot of people with ailments suffer because they didn't want to go to hospital because of COVID. And so had we had e-health, then you would have done it remotely on your phone, and that would, your consultation would be had on the phone, and we talked about information. So hopefully, if it was implemented, that people would trust the medical service that they would get on their phone. But this policy wasn't implemented, and I think it was at this year's State of the Nation address that the President mentioned it as almost as if it's a new policy. And so, again, policy, we're very good at putting together policy. Policy should be implemented, and policy is important because this was one of those policies that was very forward-thinking. I mean, it happened before the 4IR, but it actually is a 4IR policy of linking these three, education, health, and government services. So, yeah, policy is important. The other policy that we've had, which is a low-hanging fruit for triggering or reviving the economy, is spectrum. And we've been kicking the can down the road for the past, almost 13 years and not implementing spectrum. And spectrum is the reason why you'll have 5G. Spectrum is the reason why you'd have high-speed connectivity. And also, you cannot have this this broadband across the country without spectrum release so that every corner of this country is covered. So there are lots of policies that we have that are just not being implemented that would solve some of the economic problems that we have.
Thanks very much, Toby, and thanks to the responses from the panel. I think we'll take a couple of questions. We have just short of probably 10 to 12 minutes left. I don't know if sorry, it's over here, sorry, excuse me. So there's one interesting one there already, which is one that seems to come up quite a lot. Governments seem to hold too much power by levering technology to monitor citizens and to either block or curate the internet. Now, that is true, particularly in some of the Asian countries. What can citizens do to hold governments accountable and curtail their control while balancing on security needs? Who wants to take one of that? It's a good question.
So I'll start. When I say you have a universal digital identity, that digital identity will remain anonymous to government or to any organization that wants additional information. When you're facilitating that instruction, it will just be between yourself and the organization. And that's why you need an independent authoritative body. When they manage certain things, when they take care of that digital identity, no one will be able to track you in that instance. So you wouldn't have to fear that someone else will be able to gather enough information about you and your whereabouts and whatever you're doing.
Anybody else?
So, I think I agree, and unfortunately we don't have that body at the moment. So we are at risk with the information that we provide, not only to companies, but to government. And a trend that is worrying that I'm seeing is information that's used to sabotage an individual, either in business and especially in politics. So personal information, be it in your health information or your financial information, that's been shared publicly at a time to use it against you, and that's what we're seeing increasingly. So I think that body is very necessary for a fledgling democracy.
Just to add to that, interestingly enough, China has the highest levels of trust in all main institutions in the 28 countries that we study trust in. So it's an interesting dichotomy around this question in the context of that, because I think it's also about balancing the needs of particular society and how that society operates, if you can balance that effectively, because it may be in certain societies the levels differ, the opinions differ in, should we be regulated, shouldn't we, should we have Big Brother watching us, shouldn't we, and I think sometimes when you accept that and that's part of kind of what you know, that is, you trust in that, because it's all you know.
I think if it's less tracking and more monitoring in terms of, from a point of view of safety, and making sure that people's lives are better or safer, and if people trust that that is what their government's view is, then I think it's a different story. And so, yeah, absolutely.
But I think another important thing is transparency and intent. And communicating that. So I'd be curious, actually, if we looked at the government example that you mentioned, if you are open, so even a company that collects your data for advertising purposes, if they tell you that, if they're transparent about their intent, give you the option to opt in, which is always better, you are probably going to trust them more. And then it comes back to your earlier point of the ethics, and then the ability. So I think you kind of, if you have both of those, you will probably trust your government a lot more. If you know that the intent is right and it's transparent and communicated, but then there also comes the, are they able to protect do they have the expertise to protect my data?
I think I'm going to take one more. Arlene, this was particularly focused at you, but again, it's for the whole panel. How much interest is there in technology at grassroots level? And what, are there barriers to sort of developing the curiosity in technology and then adopting technology?
So if we look specifically at what we did, teaching young people to code, what we focused a lot on is, sharing the story in taking away the barriers, because a lot of people, I think, and this is my example earlier with older people, they feel like there's this barrier to technology. And the same in this country specifically, you feel like there's this massive barrier to study software engineering. I would have to have all these degrees behind me and know all these things, and it's really difficult to access, but it's not. So what we always try to do is just to show, okay, the apps that you're familiar with, so just bring it back to what you're familiar with, game design, and just relating it to us. So that worked really well, just making it a lot more relatable. But absolutely, I think it's very much a trend. So the question is asking about the African continent. It's incredible for me to see the advances that we see here. I think we want to change, we want to move, we want to build new things, we want to move forward, and technology empowers us to do that. I think as a continent, that is quite in our spirit, so I see, and I'm very excited about, and also the more accessible it becomes, the more we see advances as well, which is quite exciting to me.
Absolutely. Thanks. I'm a little bit worried about time, and I do see some interesting questions coming up, but what we will do as a panel is we will try and respond to a number of those questions on the platform as we go ahead. I want to give each of you just a minute, just to give us some of your parting thoughts on the issue of trust in technology or using technology to enable trust. Tabi, starting with you.
Yeah, I think you cannot have technology without trust. The two are connected. I also, as much as I think embracing technology is a very positive thing for communities, societies, the economy, I'm fearful that technology is divisive, and also technology, if not widespread, can result in inequality and can encourage, this widening of this inequality gap that we're seeing in a lot of our developing economies. So as much as I'm excited about the adoption of technology, especially on the continent and with young people, I also think that it needs to be equitable, and also we need to ensure that there is that the older generation trust technology and understand that without the trust, you may be left behind. But at the same time, also what I've realized is that there should be bodies that protect our information, and that is one way of then adopting and embracing this technology. So really, I think that a body is needed to make sure that an independent body of, independent of corporates and independent of government, to ensure that our information is kept safe.
You touch on one of my passions, being technology inequality, but that's another 2-hour discussion, so I think we'll skip it for there. Karena?
I think trust in technology has to move at the same pace of the issues that we're facing today. And I think often there's a speed to innovation that doesn't perhaps consider the dimensions of trust that would need to be built at the same time. So there's an expectation that people must automatically trust in. And I think that trust, as I said earlier, has to be earned. And the only way that it can be earned is really through the demonstration of the right intent and the desire to have a higher purpose around that in terms of really sort of the enablement and the betterment of society as a whole.
I think it's important that trust cannot be assumed. It needs to be continuously earned. Prashant?
Yeah, from my perspective, when someone asked me a question to say, if you were a king and you had a wand to make a change, what would that change be? And I looked at it and I said, I would like to change the way we present ourselves in the digital world. By that I mean all the information that we provide or into the digital world by Google search or when we're interacting with organizations, we need to ensure whatever information we part with the digital portal is truthful and in engaging in a manner that you have the trust that the portal will trust you and you will trust the portal. So it's just how we, as an organization and individual, have to present ourselves in the digital world.
At the end of the day, there's always a human element behind each of those portals or that piece of information. Yeah. And so is the trust in the technology or in the human? It's an interesting point. Arlene?
Maybe that's the point that I will make. So Karena, you also mentioned the speed of technology. I think what happens often, and maybe I'll speak as a tech entrepreneur myself, and maybe more from the corporate side, often we have very good intentions, and we're excited about this new technology, and we say, well, what if we put everyone's data together? Look at all the great things we can do for society. And then technology moves so quickly, and then we don't often realize the implications of what we have. And let's say, for example, now we get hacked and we leak out. It wasn't necessarily the intent. So I think what's really important is for us to recognize the responsibility that we have and that we cannot take that for granted. And to Tabi's point, I think this is where policy and independent bodies are really important. So just a small example, but the POPI Act being enforced now from the 1st of July, that has made, so I'm a part of Entrepreneurs Organization, I see everyone now taking it very seriously. And things like policy and independent bodies, sometimes we as exciting entrepreneurs need that to hold us to account. I think that's very important.
Absolutely. Any marketer that phones me after 1st of July is going to get an earful about POPI. So yeah, thank you so much to the panel. I think it's clear that trust remains an issue. It's always going to be an issue. It's something that we have to continue building in society, between industry and society, between institutions and society. But I don't think it's a game breaker. I think in some areas we have to take a leap of faith. We have to use technology. We have to start to understand technology. It's not going away. And I think, Prashant, as you mentioned, using technology and becoming au fait with technology is the best way to trust a technology. And it's encouraging to know that tech developers and companies are putting trust and ethics at the forefront of their development as they develop a product, not as an afterthought once the product is on the market. And I think that's the new way forward. And as we said, policy from a government perspective is key. in large-scale rollouts of a number of these things. So with that, I'd like to thank the panel for a very enlightening discussion. I think it's been great and very much in the vein of St. Gallen. And back to the program director.
Thank you to the panel. I think what we've learned is that technology can be a bittersweet issue to deal with, and it's only time that will tell how we will go forward. So interesting for us this evening is that if we look at me being part of the panel, we're in a cross-generational discussion, and so what we have this evening with us is the leaders of tomorrow. So every year the St. Gallen Symposium have this sort of competition that they run across the globe, giving the leaders of tomorrow an opportunity for an essay competition. And we were very fortunate in South Africa that they choose every year 100 globally, and 5 of them were from South Africa, and we have them here. So with the generational issues leaving the platform, then we will then invite the leaders of tomorrow to come forward. I will then call you out by your name, and each of them will have a 2-minute chance to give their essay synopsis to you. As I call them out, they will come and take their seat in the platform, and as then give their 2-minute speech, 2-minute synopsis. First is Mr. Edwin Hlawani. If you can come forward, he is a master's student and entrepreneur from the University of Johannesburg. Thank you. Ms. Lena Lukusa, she's a master's student from the University of Cape Town. Followed by Ms. Ewanise Gerber, an RLB student from Stellenbosch University. Ms. Ute Hermanus, a master's student in political science from Stellenbosch University. So we're indeed very, very proud of you. If it wasn't for COVID, these young leaders of tomorrow would have tonight been in St. Gallen, but now they're in Gauteng. So we will start then with you, Edwin, followed chronologically by everyone. I will not come up and say, you just go ahead, your 2 minutes. We'll sit there and count. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to the St. Gallen and also to the Swiss Embassy for the opportunity. So I'm Edwin Hlangwane and I'm doing my master's in biotechnology at the University of Johannesburg. And today I'll just be presenting a synopsis of my essay, which is titled Misconduct and its Detriments to Scientific Integrity. In our food lab, whenever experiments fail, I think to myself, well, these are just numbers, these are just values. I think it doesn't matter. But every time these thoughts cross my mind, I'm reminded of an incident not far from where I stay. It's an interesting story about a respected oncologist, and for the interest of this essay, we'll call him Professor X. Professor X was a cancer researcher at Wits University, and without regards for ethics, doing what was right, he decided to paint a picture of deception, fabricating data and presenting it at the American Society of Oncology and publishing his data findings in major journals. Professor X's research focused on high-dose chemotherapy, claiming that the therapy was much better than the conventional treatment at the time. Desperate and hopeless, many breast cancer patients pushed for this new therapy. In the process, 9,000 women lost their lives out of the 30,000 that have enrolled in this new therapy. In the process, over the years, an estimated 6 billion was also lost due to the failed experiments. Of course, when investigated, Professor X was dismissed from his academic and research post, but unfortunately, He's still practicing as a medical oncologist, not far from the very university he was dismissed from. This now then asks the question again, how can trust be restored when cases of this nature continue to rise? This is not an isolated case because even to date, 1 out of 3 researchers have been engaged in some kind of misconduct. This essay looks at some practical ways to ensure honest and ethical research practices on an individual, institutional, and governmental level. In brief details, the essay elucidates informal methods, AI tools, and effective policies to ensure that trust is restored, maintained, and promoted, because trust does matter. My essay is a call to mobilization, to a trust restoration movement, to a new gospel, because trust does matter. And if it matters to you and I, it will matter to everybody else. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. So the title of my essay was "Restoring Trust in the Digital Economy." So with everything that is going on, like data breaches, privacy infringement, election interference, and so on, it is safe to say that trust in the digital world is at an all-time low. So consumers are worried about power and surveillance. They reconsider how much trust they have in tech organizations that collect, manage, and share their data. Even though these organizations profess a renewed commitment about corporate privacy. We saw it with the latest backlash against WhatsApp new privacy policy. So, as the world is increasingly becoming digital, and given that trust is the foundational principle in the digital economy, one of the most important questions is, how can trust be restored in the digital economy when there is so much at stake? So my essay suggested different ways that companies can do to restore digital trust. It suggested that companies should follow 4 steps. The first one is to listen and take control of the situation. They need to acknowledge the problem and assume responsibility of the problem, for the problem. They need to address the crisis openly and quickly, then develop a solution. Here, companies' leaders can put new technology at work to restore digital trust. Technology will help to enforce control and boost data privacy. For example, with blockchain, consumers can decide what type of personal information they want to share, with whom and under which circumstances, instead of the standard way of consent, which is not always an effective tool. Technology will also help to harden security, to enhance transparency, and to reinforce responsible and ethical practices. For example, by promoting inclusion with tools that detect biases and test fairness. The last step is to commit to change. Here, companies need to make credible and realistic commitment and prove that they are following up on them. So it's true that technology itself cannot ensure long-term trust. To master the trust paradigm, companies should always put consumers first, and then they can mix new technologies with their company's fundamental core principles, along with the cohesive effort across governance, leadership, culture, and strategy. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Evanise Gerber. I'm from Stellenbosch University. And before I start, I just want to say the hardest part about this essay was to summarize it in 3 minutes, so I'm going to try my best. But as we've heard, there's just so much to say about it. So I started with respect, truth, and trust walk hand in hand. And once truth is lost, respect is lost, and trust is lost automatically. But truth, as we've heard, is relative. Social media and the internet provides you the ability to create your own truth, which is not the whole nor the global truth. it.
Fall on you.
It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Thanks. This generation that I'm part of question every fact, and we Google every fact, but paradoxically enough, our leaders make and sell promises based on non-factual ideas and visions, and their abilities as leaders are weighed in their ability to persuade someone in collaboration of pursuit of this common mission, and yet we choose to trust the mission rather than the information. The golden thread in this is the illusion that the information that is put in the public sphere ought to be respected as the truth, and this would lead to it being trusted. However, the source is not always trusted nor respected, and with a society being able to create your own truth, it rarely is the true truth or a global truth. True information, therefore, needs to be at the core of this solution. It is argued that the relative concept of truth is used as a thrust mechanism to enact trust, in a world where the internet creates the illusion of transparency of information. The suggestion is to redefine truth. A promise cannot be made without proof nor progress shown. Creating one integrated database on which any individual can go and check who ought to comply and to what extent, and the progress that's being made, will enable we as the receivers of those truths to fact-check the enactment. Addressing an institutional void should not be vague, it should not be a hypothetical commitment, it should be a practical step that's actively taken and tracked. These can be reconciled with the promises and the commitments that are being recorded in this database. These can be, once this information is in the public sphere, the public has the power to address these shortcomings. Because trust regarding leadership has changed. It has been built on an emotional vision, creating this resemblance between the leader and the follower. But everyone has an opinion and everyone has a perspective and a vision, but there needs to be an opportunity to reconcile this with the truth, the global whole truth. When this database provides this opportunity, respect will be regained regarding those who do provide true information and true action. Truth will not be relative anymore, but relevant. And once relevant, it can be used as a thrust mechanism to prove that money is being put where your mouth is, and the internet will portray true information and not an illusion. And only once this is possible, it is argued that trust can be restored. Thanks.
Hopefully it doesn't. Is it fine? Oh, okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sita Armanis, and as was mentioned earlier, I'm doing my master's in political science. I just wanted to disclose that the reason why I entered into the competition is the fact that the overall theme of the symposium actually touches on my thesis, which focuses on youth participation in South Africa and how their attitudes have implications towards this young democracy. So as a youth myself, I do believe that youth are the agents of change and definitely the pioneers of the future. Rebuilding trust in institutions, political systems, and with government is really crucial, especially for the functioning of a democracy. So I think it's known by this point that there are a lot of ways to understand trust, there's different ways to measure it, and it definitely does have a really integral part in the functioning of a democracy. But trust has been in decline across the globe, especially since 2008 with the financial crisis. And the occurrence of the pandemic obviously has highlighted how the lack of trust that people have with government institutions, but also that trust is influenced by multiple other factors. So I know that some scholars also say that the decline of a trust rather leads to a political trust crisis. And this is just because trust is a prerequisite for democratic rule and stability. So low levels of trust pose dire and direct consequences to the quality and stability of representative democracy. But in recent years, other scholars, specifically Dalton, suggest that social change may be the reason for the changing relationship between citizens and the state. And this argument is grounded on the belief that citizenship norms act as an explanation to broader changes which stem from social modernization with youth at the forefront. So what I'm saying is that youth may view things differently. The way that we understand trust is different. And although governments seek to sustain trust in a more traditional way, youth have more engaged norms. And these norms may pose certain challenges, but it also invigorates support for democratic values. They're also more proactive and hold a more socially responsible view of citizenship. So trust does matter. And what I'm suggesting is building on this notion of an engaged citizen. One way to repair trust is to expand the scope of its understanding and evaluation to social transformation. And this can be done by drawing on Dalton's argument that change in trust is central to the norms of citizenship. And this will require focus to be placed on the effects of social modernization and generational shift, as youth display different norms in contrast to older cohorts. This also means that we need to expand the way that we evaluate trust in the contemporary landscape in a way that highlights youth perceptions and utilizing appropriate measures. It's also important for government to take more accountability for their behavior, and this because youth are also more rational and we judge and perceive government performance completely differently. It's important that government also acts immediately when issues arise, and this can be done from low-hanging fruit. So just as Rome wasn't built in one night, trust definitely can't be built in one night as well. It's a constant investment, and trust does matter, but one way to move forward to understanding trust and one way to tackle it is definitely by trying to perceive it the way that youth do, and from there we can build and possibly also strengthen and persevere trust for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a mouthful. And, you know, I was sitting here this evening listening to the panel, listening now to your the leaders of tomorrow, and me as a baby boomer myself, I'm thinking, my goodness, this stuff is here. But I can tell you one thing, I'm much more scared for this mic than I am for the digital world. I'd rather take the digital world than this mic, but anyway, it's here. For me as a baby boomer, I love the digital world. So I was listening and thinking, oh, okay, no, we're not scared of that one. But what I want to say, because this symposium is about cross-generational sharing of thought. And I listened to all these very high, very clever thinking of the new technology and where we're taking it. And I'm thinking, at the end of the day, it's back to basics. That is all that matters, is back to basics. And this afternoon, I spoke to my good friend Gansen Pillay, who's also the Deputy CEO of the National Research Foundation. And we were discussing this whole issue of trust. So I want to give you this evening, who by the way is also a baby. In fact, I think he's beyond baby boom. So I want to give you his message this evening, which he then texts to me. And I think this is going back to basic. Trust must be interwoven into the fabric of respect, ethics, and integrity. You cannot get trust if you do not give trust. You cannot demand trust. Trust has to be earned. Great partnerships are built on the foundation of trust and respect. For a team, together everyone accomplishes more. Trust is the bedrock of teamwork, of partnerships, and of fruitful collaboration. Trust is a relationship which does not only ignite minds, but touches souls. So, from the baby boomers and beyond, this is our message to the young leaders of tomorrow. Go back to basics. You're still going to have your families. At the end of the day, is that back to basics. And if we all teach the next generation trust in the home, integrity, truth starts in the home, it will play out in technology. That I believe. So with that is the end of our deliberations, and I wish to thank everybody, and especially this lady standing up, who's Rafaela, my assistant. We work as a team at the Science and Technology Office, a great help that has been helping me. And then, Veronique, our charge d'affaires, who's my immediate boss, thank you for allowing us to be so free in our efforts and our work. And then to the panel and the leaders of tomorrow and the University of Pretoria and our trusted photographer who's busy with her issues there. I think it was a great evening. Thank you for all that contributed. And come and enjoy some refreshments with us. Thank you.